All right. And then just confirming that folks can see my screen.
Yes.
Great.
Well, great. Welcome. Thank you, everybody, for joining us again. We're here for our second meeting for our Rulemaking Advisory Committee for Early Learning Hubs. And next slide, please. So we're going to go through our agenda for today. We will get started with some DELC introductions, just so you're familiar with who we are. I will get us started. My name is Maria Mendoza. I'm an Early Learning Hub Coordinator here at DELC, and I use she, her, aya pronouns, and I will pass it to Nancy.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Nancy Hout, also an Early Learning Hub coordinator, and I'll be facilitating this meeting along with Maria. And my pronouns are she, her, and I'll pass it along to Rachel.
Thank you, Nancy. Hello, everyone. My name is Rachel Elliott. I use she, her pronouns, the Head Start Collaboration Specialist at DELC, and I'll be supporting the timekeeping elements of this RAC meeting today. And I will pass it to, I believe Kate is in the room, Zoom room.
I'm here. Good morning, Kate Dennison, Government Affairs Manager for DELC. I'll pass it to Gabby.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Gabby Hernandez, she, her pronouns, council administrator, and here to help with facilitation and some note taking.
Great. Thanks, Gabby. And if you are comfortable, you're more than welcome to do some chat box introductions with your name and anything you're willing to share. Feel free to do that in the chat box. But for the rest of our day, we are going to quickly go over the review, the group agreements. We will go over the RAC meeting process. We will review the RAC purpose, review the draft rules, and then we'll finish up with closing comments and some thank yous. Next slide, please. So these are the same agreements that we agreed upon yesterday. I won't read them all to you again, but I will leave them here on the screen for a moment for you to take a look at. And yeah, we felt yesterday went well. So thank you, everybody, so much. And next slide, please. So for RAC feedback, just a quick reminder, for this set of rules, we did allow for a little bit more time because we know they are a little bit more some fuller rules and new rules. So we are having, depending on the rule, we have about 10 to 20 minutes of discussion per rule. And of course, we will have Rachel, who is going to be helping to keep us on track. And we are going to ask that you refer to the proposed draft rules document, given that the rules that we are going to be discussing today are new rules. And just a quick reminder, we are going to ask that you raise your hand and you will unmute when you're called upon. And then just please be mindful of the time so that everyone has an opportunity to share. And also, just a quick reminder, you are welcome to submit feedback in the chat, and we will be saving all of the chat for documentation purposes.
Okay, for proposed rule changes, yesterday we discussed 5 current and proposed new rules. Today we'll be discussing 4, and they are the ones that are checked on the right-hand side. That includes backbone entity structure, early learning hub governance structure, early learning hub director role, and data collection and reporting. Next slide. Thank you. As we discussed yesterday, we are looking for feedback from you related to fiscal impacts, resources needed to implement the change, equity impacts, for example, unintended consequences that may impact specific groups or communities, unclear rule language, any unintended consequences as a result of the rule change, and any additional resources that may be needed to support the implementation of these rules. So this is just a refresher from yesterday. So let's get started. We will start with backbone entity structure. Again, this is a new rule, and you can refer to page 6 from the draft rules document that we sent out. So in summary, this rule defines backbone entities as administrative and fiscal support providers while clarifying that funding decisions are made by the Governance Council. So the rule requires establishing requirements of the backbone for financial transparency, auditing compliance, and fiscal independence from department funding. It mandates a conflict of interest policies. The rule requires adhering to a not to exceed amount for administrative overhead costs set by the department and being and remaining fiscally sound. It provides support for hub functions for the full geographic region of the hub, even if it's not the same as the backbone entity's general or usual service region. And you can go to the next slide. We'll finish this one out. So to continue, a hub that has demonstrated the ability to provide stable organizational and operational structures to the satisfaction of the department may provide its own operational and fiscal support. And then finally, if the department determines that the grant agreement with the backbone entity will be terminated, whether voluntarily or involuntarily, it will issue a competitive request for application, an RFA, within the affected hub region. We can open it up for feedback now. Yeah, Diane.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. In the summary, it says in the very first line that there's auditing compliance, but I didn't see even the word audit, but I don't know if maybe I'm missing it. But when I look in 1D, the maintaining transparency, I think it might be helpful to have like maintain transparency by what the process might be, whether it's auditing or surveys of the governance council or what that would look like.
Thank you. And thanks for referencing where you thought it should go in the rules. Yes, Brett.
Good morning, Nancy. I was wondering if, as you're writing these, if any thought was given to identifying the types of entities that could be eligible as backbone organizations. If not, would that be helpful, or would that be too limiting in terms of what you're hoping to accomplish with this rule?
Do you mean providing like a complete list or just examples?
Good
Curious.
question. Yeah. I guess I was thinking a complete list.
Thank you for that.
This is Sarah. Brett, I'm curious about that question. Can you just clarify, you're asking for a complete list of organizations that would qualify as backbone entities?
Not organizations specifically, but the types of organizations. So community colleges, for example, independent nonprofits. I guess I don't know if that's helpful or not. It's just sort of a wondering. I don't know if that's helpful to answer your question, Sarah, but yeah. Like, for example, in my region, I wouldn't be suggesting, for example, that the rule specifically identifies Clackamas Community College as a potential backbone entity, but rather community colleges broadly as a place where early learning hubs could live.
Yeah, I guess I would push back a little bit and just suggest that we talk about the characteristics of a backbone agency instead of defining a specific organization.
And Sarah, with characteristics, and this might be something you might want to mull over, but do you think that would be in addition to some of the characteristics that we provide in the rules? Can you imagine that there might be additional characteristics that should be included?
No, actually, I think that you all have done a good job at defining what that is.
Thank you. Lisa and then Debbie. Oh, Lisa, you're on mute.
Sorry, my clicking power is not what it needs to be today. Yeah, I think I agree that, identifying the characteristics and what the entity would need to do. There could be some other documentation that provides some examples of what's in play, perhaps, but I think, just really focusing on the intention, I think is really helpful. And I know that you all are going through one of the draft versions with the orange and green bars. And then as I look at, and this happened to me yesterday as well, as I look at the track changes copy that was filed with the Secretary of State, there's some differences in the language that I'm really trying to track. And there's in this section, and I don't know that it's substantive yet, but I think there's enough changes that I'm curious what happened between the version that we're reviewing and then the version that was filed, or which came first and which one should we be really looking at?
Lisa, are you referring to this particular rule or just in general?
Well, both. This particular rule, and I could be wrong, like I'm happy to be wrong. But on page 6, where it starts with the backbone entity and then the changes to the rule in the track changes Secretary of State, then the lettering and numbering doesn't line up, and then there seems to be an additional piece. Again, I'm not sure that it's substantive yet, but it's confusing for me as I'm sort of trying to do that. And that happened to me yesterday as well. So I just want to call that. I don't know that I don't want to interrupt your process, but I think I am curious which is the one that we need to be really reviewing today and as a part of the RAC.
To answer that last question, I would say it's the draft rules, the PDF that we shared in the calendar invite. But Marie and I can review this with a fine-tooth comb and do a comparison. So I appreciate you flagging that. And then Debbie, I think you were next. Oh, I think you're on mute, Debbie.
Of course I am.
Yeah.
You made some really prolific thoughts there. I just have some thoughts about the wording or structure of a couple of areas. As I was reading through it, I found myself having to go back and reread a few times. And so in number 1, where it says to provide stable organizational and operational structures to the satisfaction of the department, I'm assuming that the items listed below, A through G, it looks like, are the criteria being used for satisfaction of the department and what would qualify as being satisfying to the department. And I'm just wondering if that first paragraph could be worded a little bit differently so it's clear that that's what's being pointed out there. the area E, 1E, I think, where it starts with being and remaining fiscally sound. And I was going to try and work on some wording this morning, and I just didn't ever get to it. But a backbone entity should be an entity with the ability to fiscally support its core operations without funding from the department to operate and administer hub functions. I know what's being meant there after reading it a few times and sort of digging into the language a little bit, and I'm wondering if that could be a little bit more clear. And then particularly number 2, where it says conflict of interest policies. I know that those conflict of interest items are mentioned later on, but I'm just wondering if there can be some clarity provided there around what conflict of interest would mean.
Thank you, Debbie. That's helpful. Lydia, I noticed that you had a question in the chat. What will the timeline look like? And can you share kind of a little bit more specifics on that?
Yes,
I want to
ma'am.
make sure that I'm clear on it.
No worries. So if a hub decides that they're no longer a good fit for a backbone, what would the timeline look like if they want to leave from the backbone and find somewhere else to be at? Like if they want to go become independent, or if they want to find another backbone and there's a conflict that's happening, what would the timeline look like for that hub to be able to say, we want to leave, but we know the contract isn't up yet? Can we figure out a way to put in there if something happens like that?
Got it. Thank you. Thank you very much. I have Rochelle, then Jillian.
Yeah, I think mine are mostly for the governance section and just delineating between these two sections. So I'm going to hold off.
Thank you.
Nancy, can I interrupt for a quick second? Oh,
Sure.
Gabby posted it in there, but for the raised hand option, it is under reaction and under the react where you see the heart. If you click that little arrow, or if you click the react button, the heart, then you'll have the raise hand option. Great.
Thanks, Maria. Jillian, then Brett and Greta.
Yes, I'd like to add to the comment about the conflict of interest as I read it on page 7 of the new, what you sent out. Backbone, let's see, let me make sure I have, backbone entities or hubs providing their own operational and fiscal support must establish and enforce conflict of interest policies. And then it says, for all staff, community partners, and any sub-grantees designed to prevent undue influence in funding or operational decisions. In the original application and ongoing for the last 10 years, there's been the term firewall, and the firewall pertained to how the backbone would not have preferential treatment for funding and how they would separate it. And so I don't see that here in the wording.
Thank you, Jillian. Brett?
Thanks, Nancy. So a couple things. One, kind of going back to my comment a few minutes ago about specifically identifying the types of organizations that can serve as backbone entities. I certainly understand people's reluctance to want to move in that direction because you don't want to box yourself in, and that could get really lengthy and all of that. I think the thing that is occurring to me, and perhaps this seems like too obvious, but explicitly stating that the backbone entity ought to have an investment in early care and education and supporting young children and their families as part of its overall mission, and that is a priority for that agency, seems to make sense to me. And I realize that we ought to take that as a given, but I don't think we can. So maybe that's a middle ground between specifically identifying the types of entities that can be backbones and just leaving that piece completely untouched. The other comment that I have is in regard to section 4. If the department determines that the grant agreement with a backbone entity will be terminated, whether voluntarily or involuntarily, it seems to me that we ought to have some language around what would trigger either of those circumstances. So, for example, a voluntary termination of a grant agreement, I would think would be at the request of the governance council, right? If the governance council were to come to Delk and say, this backbone entity is no longer effectively serving the purposes as outlined in statute, rule, grant agreement, we need to make a change. And then involuntarily might be if the backbone entity is not, meeting the letter of the grant agreement. I guess I have fewer thoughts on that one, but having some type of language around how to trigger or initiate that process seems worthwhile to me.
Thank you. And thanks for clarifying the earlier point in the discussion. Greta, and then I want to read Diane's chat.
Good morning. I just appreciate Jillian and Brett's comments regarding any of the backbone entities having undue influence and whatever we can support around that to ensure that they have the proper intentions and not influential in ways that we aren't anticipating. But I wanted to address F with the not to exceed amount for administrative overhead costs. Will those amounts be proportional to the region? I'm asking this because we've had so much turnover in our hub, and that can affect its ability to function. And so attracting and having competitive compensation for hub directors and hub staff is important so that we're not losing people to other jobs.
Thank you, Greta, and thanks for providing your regional context on that. That's helpful. Diane, I want to read Diane Wilkinson's chat. I agree with Brett that a backbone should show an existing investment or interest in early learning, early childhood. So just agreeing with Brett on a characteristic of a backbone entity. Rachel just put in the chat that we have 2 minutes left in this section, so hoping to get a little more feedback.
I'm curious, does the line that says establishing requirements for financial transparency, auditing compliance, and fiscal independence from department funding, would that allow for a hub to become their own, like not go under a backbone, but to become their own entity? Is that the intention? Maria, I see you shaking your head, yes.
Yes, that is the intention. I know we have one current early learning hub who does not have a backbone because of that ability to demonstrate to be able to provide those services in-house. And so, yes, we wanted to be able to provide a pathway for other early learning hubs to be able to pursue a similar model.
Diane?
Yes, I had one more, and I'm not sure that I'm just going to spit it out. So in G, providing support for hub functions for full geographic region. I'm sort of a broken record on this, but I just wondered, is that fiscal support? Is that personnel support when we're talking about these wide regions that maybe the farther out areas aren't being supported, and how is that monitored?
I can just speak to the intention is that the support from the backbone would have parity across all regions. And I can't answer the auditing piece yet.
Nancy, we are at time.
Thank you, Rachel.
Great. The next role we are going to discuss is the Early Learning Hub Director role, which can be referenced on page 9. A summary, each hub must have designated a hub director or directors who focuses on centering equity and addressing the needs of the region's priority populations, including leading regional system coordination and ensuring alignment with RAISE Oregon, independently overseeing hub fiscal transparency, community partnerships, and strategic initiatives, expanding responsibilities to include continuous monitoring of hub effectiveness and equity in service delivery while addressing the needs of the region's priority populations. Hub directors are employed by the backbone entity for administrative purposes. And we can open it up to feedback. Yes, Diane.
Thank you. I was prepared today. So in the very first paragraph, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, the region's priority populations. I'd love to see some language of as determined by, who's making those determinations for the priority populations. And then down below, I was also in number 2, the last sentence, the hub director's role while different region to region. I was wondering why would the director's role be different? And that you don't have to answer that now. I just was curious about that. And I think that's it.
Great, thank you. Jillian.
I agree that it would be great to have clarity about priority populations. And up till now, the governance and the director work together to identify that with other partners. And so I'm just curious as to how that would happen.
Great. Thank you so much. Lisa.
I'm wondering if there might be a governance council and one is uppercase, which might carry some weight or baggage with this name. And I'm curious if there is a way, and it comes up later in the rules too, like I have a board of directors and I have, various committees that help to do. So somehow taking sort of stigma out of having an uppercase governance council when it might look a little bit different. Might be semantics here, but I think it might, for some, depending on the backbone structure, it might create some unnecessary confusion on what a governance council is or isn't.
Okay, great. Yeah, we can definitely take a look at that.
I do want to note that Sabi dropped a note in the chat in Spanish. Give me a quick sec. I'm going to stop sharing for just a second to bring the translator in to interpret. Give me one sec. Ok, Adriana, ¿puedes traducir el comentario de Sabi, por favor?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me in this channel?
Yes.
Okay, what she's saying is that in particular, the meetings that are convocated by the department, which department actually, I think that it must be more specific, that language.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Adriana. And
My pleasure.
I'm reopening up the interpretation channel. Sabi, estoy reabriendo el cuarto, so vas a tener que ir de nuevo al globo para meterte al cuarto en español. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Gabby.
Sí.
Diane, go ahead.
This might not be the right place either, but I wondered, I know we had talked a little bit yesterday about the coordinated enrollment piece. that it's just sort of lacking in general, but I wondered if it should be, there should be a bullet point in the hub director's roles as far as managing what coordinated enrollment looks like.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much for that. Brett.
Once again, at the risk of being too obvious, I wonder if we need to explicitly state something about the role of the hub director in leading the implementation of the hub work plan and deliverables as specified in the grant agreement. And a corollary to that would be transparency with the governance council, transparency and collaboration with the governance council in regard to the execution of that work plan and deliverables in the grants agreement, and also transparency and collaboration with governance council in regard to the development of the hub budget.
Great. Thank you. Rochelle?
I am looking at number 2, and it's about how the hub director is employed by the backbone agency or backbone entity for administrative purposes. I just have some concerns about as an employer, you have roles and responsibilities as well. And I feel like, I don't know if diminishes is the correct word to use here, but as a strong employer, you would want to ensure, professional growth and those kinds of things. And I know this will come up in the governance as well. As I was previewing it, I just am having a hard time between the hub director is an employee of the backbone, and full transparency, I'm from a backbone agency and supervise our current hub director. And so I just that yes, she is also working with the governance board or governance council, but there are certain things that as an employee, to just say administrative only almost makes it infer like it's just checking the box. It's just semantics, really. So I just have concerns about that relationship, and maybe it'll come up in the next section.
Is there anything that in this section you think would be helpful to have as additions that you have identified?
Um, I I will work on that language, but I'm wondering about, I mean, we would also want, because that is a partnership, and I know oh, good, I have somebody else making a comment, but um, there's also, I think, that obligation to be a good steward of the backbone agencies. We are aligned, all of our backbones, and this kind of gets to what people were talking about earlier about having that, interest in early learning and early childhood. And so some language around that the hub directors also need to be a steward of their backbone agency's mission and vision, or, where it aligns or something to that effect. I'll keep working on it, but that's where my head goes.
Great. Thanks, Rochelle. Debbie.
There I am, muted again, sorry. Rochelle and I work for the same agency, and so I just want to put that out there. And again, I come at this from sort of an HR lens. And I would agree. So I think that where it says that they're employed for administrative purposes almost makes it sound as if they're a different employee of the organization, or that the expectations are different. And I think it's important to note that that person is coached by the backbone entity, they're evaluated by the backbone entity, they're supported by the backbone entity. And as Rochelle was saying, I use the term, being a good ambassador of the backbone entity, just as the backbone entity should have some expectations, like Brett said, around interest in early childhood.
Great. Thank you, Debbie. Any other closing comments? I think we're close
We
to.
are, Maria.
Are we at
Yeah,
time? All
we
right.
are, yes.
Thanks, Rachel. All right, next slide, please. Oh, hub governance structure. Perfect. So this will be at the top. This will be on page 7, where you can reference this. And we do also have one piece that seems to have gotten left off for this section. And I believe Nancy's going to drop this in the chat for us, where you can see one addition, and it is in red, but I will give a quick summary while you take a look at the addition there. The Governance Council is the autonomous body responsible for directing the administration of the grant agreement for the Early Learning Hub, decision-making for the investments of the Early Learning Hub funds, expanding membership to include health, education, human services, housing, business, parent and caregiver representative, and tribal representatives, having authority over investments as outlined in the grant agreement, requiring bylaws that ensure transparency and dispute resolution, and introducing a process for governance councils to request a transition of the backbone entity if confidence is lost. And we can open this up for feedback. And I will go ahead and read the one that was left off. So it was in 1, and it's D, and that one is, if the hub director or director is unable to convene all sectors and members for governance council membership, the hub director must contact the department for support. And let's get started with Jen.
Thanks, Maria. This is the section where I had the most concerns, and I totally understand why this is written, but I'm concerned that it may be taking it a little bit too far and potentially shooting ourselves in the foot in terms of backbone organizations' willingness to work with the hubs. I feel like the hubs and their backbones need to be in a partnership together to work together on moving Raise Up Oregon forward. And I feel like this pits us against each other in a sense. I feel like, bylaws really calling out that the hubs, the governance council needs to have their own set of bylaws. Bylaws are for corporations. I think we need to have charters or MOUs or something clearly outlined that differentiates the authorities of the hubs and the authorities of the backbones. Without asking the hubs to become a separate corporation. I do think that the way this is written could potentially disincentivize backbones from wanting to participate with us. And when the backbones are holding all the risk, they need to have some level of authority. And I think that what we have written in terms of section 5A and B, if the governance council feels like the backbone is not doing that, there's a process in place for them to appeal and to make some changes. But I do feel like asking the backbone to take all the risk without giving them any authority is going to be counterproductive.
Jen, what would authority for a backbone look like? Or what do you have thoughts around that?
So I feel like as long as the backbone and the governance council are demonstrating that they're engaging in this partnership together in moving Raise Up Oregon together in the same way, I don't have any issue with the backbone having authority over the final approval of the hub's financial documents. For example, that's what we do in our organization. Our council approves to recommend, and the board of the backbone actually approves. So it's a recommend and approve. And it works well as long as the backbone is working on the same priorities. So as long as we have things in place for when that doesn't happen, I think it's okay for the backbone to have that authority that matches the level of risk that they're putting into the agreement.
Great. Thank you, Jen. Mm-hmm. I believe Diane was next.
Thank you. I appreciate D, and it does sort of answer my concern or question is in 1A, must include representatives. I'd love to see language around showing some active and equal recruitment around the region for those council members.
Okay. Great, thank you. I believe Rochelle was next.
Thank you. One of the things that I had a hard time with, like Jen said, this is where I had most of my questions and thoughts and comments, is if the intent, it really feels like the language is more of a board of directors and instead of a governance council. And so the difference between those two, in fact, I looked it up just to see what the difference is, because I am concerned about our current council and the commitment and the level. I don't think it matches. You know, if you volunteer to be on a board of directors, you know there are quite a few demands and you have some, like Jen was saying, responsibility for the fiduciary and like the finances and all of those pieces. A governance council to me is more of that guiding. It's kind of back to our conversation yesterday with having that oversight of the goals and mission of the early learning hub and the priorities for service. And some of the language in here really, to me, shifts it to that body that is overseeing the hub director. And this that gets back to my comment about the employer. And as Jen was saying, that partnership with our backbones. It feels like it's really removing some of that. Um, I guess I'll stop there because I know other people have comments. I have a couple other, but I'll wait till they come up.
Great, thank you so much. Megan.
Yeah, on 1A, I would really like to see some language around including representation from entities that are serving children with disabilities ages 0 to 5. So some specific language in there around early intervention, early childhood special education representation on that governance council.
Okay, great. Separate than the early learning and care services, but specifically calling that
yes, for children with disabilities. It does say the K-12 public education, but Oregon is a very unique seamless system where EIECSE is often provided by the ESDs around the region or around the state. So separating that out so there is some representation for those children's birth through 5 with disabilities.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Kim.
And I'm kind of along the same vein as that. I am a Head Start director, and I would love to have Head Start actually called out to any Head Start director to have representation on this board. I'm the largest child care preschool provider in our community, and I'm not on the board because it's represented from another community, but I serve 2 communities here and would like to have a bigger voice rather than just being on the stewardship committee that meets very briefly. Just so that I can have a better voice and more engagement. I think it would benefit my program in the community and help us come together for better alignment if it was called out.
Okay, great. Thank you. Lisa, I think you're next.
I agree with what's been said. In number 1, the last sentence says the backbone entity may not make decisions regarding investments of the early learning hub. I would recommend saying sole decision to kind of help us get to, again, it's sort of this partnership, and they may, depending on the backbone situation, may be a little bit more engaged. So that might help with some of that. And then also in 2B, it says approve strategic plans, budgets, and funding priorities. I just would clarify that that is for the hub strategic plans, budgets, and funding priorities, just to make that distinction between the hub and the backbone.
Okay, great. Thank you, Lisa. Damian. I know you told me yesterday that just that quickly your pronunciation.
Damiana.
Damiana, yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I also agree. I agree with everyone. I have something to add with 1A. A with the word must. Although, yes, I think including people from or representatives from all of these categories is crucial. I think maybe the word must should shift a little bit because especially in rural communities, it's not always possible. And so if we're bound to having a representative from each of those places because it says must and we just can't find somebody, um, that can be really challenging, especially in rural places where, I mean, our hub region is 4 hours apart. So from one place to another and across time zones also. So it can really make it difficult for in-person meetings. So I really like the way it's written in 1C, where it says a government council position must be made available for a member of each tribe in the region. That's talking about tribes and specifically, but maybe just shifting or using that same verbiage to say must be made available to this list of different entities or organization representatives.
Thank you so much for that. And I know and that was one of the reasons we were really disappointed to see that D was not left off. And so when we said if the hub director is unable to convene all sectors and members of the governance council membership to contact us for support, knowing that there will need to be some sort of accommodations made for various regions for a number of reasons. And so hoping that that would somewhat take care of that piece of it, but definitely we can look to clarify that some more as well.
Yeah, I mean, even like thinking specifically about human services, our hub had a representative from ODHS, I think twice at two different times. She just recently had to step down because she can't actually, ODHS doesn't let her attend meetings during the workday. So not only does she have to take time off, she also has to drive. And if it's, 3 hours from her home base to where the meeting is, then she's doing all of that on her volunteer time and her own dollar during a workday. And so it's tricky because we want to have someone from DHS there, but it's like it creates this there, just creates barriers in ways that we don't want to create barriers. We want to include everyone's voice.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that. I believe before I get to you, Brett, I wanted to read some of the comments in the chat. Let me see. We have a quick analogy, and then we have on 1A, is health services inclusive of CCOs? Great. Annalise, I'm not comfortable with that. I will message Allison Delory. Annalise, if you're comfortable, is there a section that came up that was not comfortable for you?
I had a question that has nothing to do with these rules, but is related to the background on these rules, and I will follow the proper channels per our contract. Thank you very much. I appreciate that, but it's not going to come up in this meeting. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Rochelle, curious why parents and caregivers are listed separately in 1B to show importance. Could there be perceived as not on the same level of the other representatives? And then I had the same question as Rochelle on the list. In 2A, it states include a chair and co-chair. I would recommend and or. To Damiana's point, with so much around approval, are all participants voting members regardless of active participation? Okay. Jen, I agree with Lisa. Reed, not requiring co-chairs, a chair should be sufficient. Okay, great. Thank you so much for all of the comments. Brett.
Thanks. I want to second some of the comments that have been made so far, particularly around calling out Head Start providers specifically. Head Start plays such an important role in serving kids and families in every region of the state. They just seem like such an important partner, and likewise, child care resource and referrals. Again, the role that they play in terms of providing service to early care and education providers. I have a hard time envisioning how an early learning hub could fully do its work without representing CCR&Rs as part of governance. And then in terms of some of the language around um, you know, who must be included, who may be included. I mean, I think the way that I think about this is that some of these um, sectors are absolutely essential to the work that the early learning hubs do, and some are nice to have slash incredibly hard to recruit to get to the table. So I appreciate that there's already language in here around hub staff reaching out to Delk for support and technical assistance around that. I think that's important. And I think just having a little bit of flexibility for regional differentiation and just some of the realities that have been brought up already about how hard it can be to recruit some people from some of those sectors.
Great. Thank you for that, Brett. Annalise.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that a little bit, and no shade or anything towards Brett, but Head Start is certainly an important cog in the early childhood wheel, but it is not the end all be all, and it is not reflective of the private market, the family child care in particular, and centers in particular. And so if there's going to be a priority for Head Start, and Head Start's going to take up the space each time, then I think that the rules need to include at least a couple of different seats for childcare, early child care and learning. That seat needs to probably be seats, because if Head Start is sitting on these governance or advisory, whatever we're going to end up calling them, then I think you need to bring the rest of the stakeholders to the table and the rest of the childcare world to the table, because Head Start is one small piece of early learning and care.
Thank you for that. I do see a comment also in the chat. Would 1C be a good place to add to a member of each tribe the word government? Thank you, Jillian. Brett, I agree that private community-based childcare providers also play a critical role in hub governance. And it looks like we have 3 minutes left for this section in case anybody wanted to add to their comments or give additional feedback. Lisa.
Regarding the list of, I think of them as buckets. I think I appreciate this conversation a lot, and I think all things are true. And I would hate for us to box ourselves in. I think that the categories here could cover CCR&R, Head Start, home-based childcare centers. We can do that as it's written here. I think from a rule perspective, I think it's where the contracts that we have also can help add a little bit more specificity, and some of the between the hubs and the department, the hubs and the community, to make sure that we've got representation of all the different types of programs that are represented. So that's just my thought and feeling on it. And I 100% agree, all of those partners are critical if we're going to be really successful in building a early childhood system that is inclusive of all different types of programs and meeting all different kinds of community needs.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. Rochelle.
My question is, and maybe I missed the language somewhere else, in this governance council, the backbone agency is not a part of the council. They should not be elevated in any means, but I just wonder the thinking behind. I mean, we attend and are participants in our hub pretty actively, and this language would probably change that. So I just would like to see backbone agencies listed for representation.
Okay. Thank you for that, Rochelle. Diane.
Thank you. I think this is all great conversations and bringing up more for me. And it might have been said in the chat, the 1B, the governance councils must include parent and caregiver representatives. I'm wondering why and how that's different than the calling out the early learning and care services up above. And then I was wondering, is there a maximum number of governance council members somewhere, or is it just by population, or is there any guidance around that?
We don't have a maximum number at this point, knowing that it can vary by region, but we can definitely look into that and see if there is a minimum that we could set or explore that some more. Thanks, Diane. Brett.
Thanks. I know we need to move on shortly. I want to respond to Lisa's comment around the categories and how early learning hubs can use existing language to identify, appropriate partners within their regions. I I agree that a term like early learning and care services could be interpreted as being comprehensive enough to include private or community-based providers, Head Start, CCRNRs, EIECSE, et cetera. The reason that this is like a bit of a sticking point for me is because a couple years ago in our region, we ran into a situation where our biggest Head Start provider, our CCRNR, and our EIECSE provider were all technically term limited based on the bylaws that the previous version of the hub governance had written. And it just didn't seem to make sense to us that organizations that played that big a role in the region in the early learning and care sector would not have seats at the table for hub governance. And so my interest here is making sure that like having enough specificity to make sure that we're not inadvertently excluding key system partners that need to be at this table. So thank you. I'll stop belaboring the point.
Thanks so much, Brett. All right, it looks like we're at time for this section. Could I get the next slide, please? Data collection and reporting. Again, this is a new rule, and you can reference this one on page 10. And for our summary, it is early learning hubs must collect and assess data in accordance with standards established by the department as outlined in the grant agreement. The rule requires hubs to use department-approved data collection tools to ensure accuracy and consistency, requires that hubs can ensure the accuracy, reliability, and validity of the data, mandates that data be used for strategic planning, continuous improvement, and measuring child and family outcomes, and strengthens confidentiality protections for family and child level data in compliance with applicable regulations. And we can open up this section for feedback as well. Jen.
I only had one small concern on this one, and that was around using approved tools and systems under number one. The hubs have been operating for a long time now, over a decade, and we've all figured out how to do this in some way or another. And so I would be really careful about having to have our data systems themselves approved. I think as long as we're meeting the requirements in the grant agreement, the tools shouldn't need to be approved.
Got it. Thank you, Jen. I see a comment in the chat. My comment is that we don't want to limit the data collection tools to only department tools, since we know in the past there have been challenges for rural on that. Thank you for that, Sarah. Any other feedback here? Kim.
So is there anything in there that cites the coordinated enrollment data, and the enrollment in the different communities? I know with our current hub, I had asked that our data be shared and not just the coordinated, not for Preschool Promise and Baby Promise, but also Head Start's data, just so that everybody on the hub could know where our vacancies were as well. So I just think that would be valuable.
Great. I think we can definitely explore the coordinated enrollment. For us currently, the coordinated enrollment is a separate grant agreement that Nancy and I do not oversee. So we focus on the rules that would be impacting our hub coordination, our hub grant agreement, but we can certainly look to see how those pieces can kind of tie together. And as we have more phases and do revisions to the rules, we can certainly explore where coordinated enrollment can fit into this rule set as well.
I'm seeing a chat from Jillian. Will there be verbiage about partnership with DELC for DELC to share data collected statewide? That's a great comment.
Diane.
Thank you. I'm not a hub director, so this might be obvious to some. The term other regional sectors is mentioned a couple of times, and I was just wondering, what does that look like? What is an other regional sector?
The regional sectors would be our sector partners within Raise Up Oregon that are outlined. So I believe here, let me think, where is the closest place we can
Maria, is it just the 6 sector partners in Raise Up Oregon? Okay, I can answer that question. It's the Department of Early Learning and Care, the Department of Education, the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, or HEC, the Department of Human Services, ODHS, the Oregon Health Authority, OHA, and the Oregon Housing and Community Services, OHCS.
Great, thank you.
Maria, would you like me to move us along to the next slide?
Yeah, I think so. I think we don't have more feedback for this section, but so we can keep going. So those were the rules for today. So really our next steps and timeline. By May 1st, we are hoping to have a summary of the feedback that we heard and be able to get that back to you and summarize all of the feedback we have collected from these 2 RAC meetings. And then we will have our next RAC meeting on May 8th from 12 to 1 p.m. We also have an opportunity for a public hearing on May 12th, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. And then we have a public comment period ending on May 31st by 5 p.m. And our rules will be presented to the Early Learning Council for vote on June 25th, 2025. And we have our contact information here for questions or concerns. And as you continue to think of other feedback or anything else that you would like to include, we did include links for our public feedback form as well as our email address for just additional public comments. So that is delc.rulescoordinator@delc.oregon.gov. Next slide, please. And I think, Gabby, you're going to go over reimbursement.
Yeah, sorry, couldn't unmute myself. So just a reminder around the reimbursement process for your participation in these meetings. We will send out the forms and information for you all to claim reimbursement if you'd like. I know there were some questions yesterday around declining. It is optional, but we do offer the option to be reimbursed for your participation for every meeting you attend, up $50 for each meeting. So we've kept attendance of everyone who's joined yesterday and today. And once we have that third meeting on May 8th, you'll all receive an email from me just with information on what to do if you'd like to receive that stipend. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
And with that, if there aren't any additional questions, we just want to thank you so much for this amazing feedback. It really helps us revise and improve the rules. And we really just appreciate your time. Are looking forward to seeing you on May 8th with the summary of all of the feedback to make sure we got it right. So thank you. And Marie and I will stay on the call for a little bit longer if anyone has any questions.
And again, thank you to our interpreter, Adriana Santos. Thank you for your services.
Thank you, Adriana.